2 of American Popular Culture. I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July. I really enjoyed reading all of your posts. I've replied back to all of them now, so go ahead and check out what I've said. Usually I ask a lot of questions back to you because if we were in a normal classroom, that's what I would do. I would keep asking you questions so you could keep answering. So, feel free to go back to those posts and continue the discussion, because that might be a way that you generate some ideas for papers or other assignments. The posts are great. You guys are really, asking questions and analyzing the content I've given you, which is exactly what I want. So that's great. So remember that you also need to reply to people's posts 2 a week. And also don't forget about Instagram and our hashtag PopCultureWVU. And if you don't put that hashtag there, I won't be able to find it. So make sure you do that. I've loved what you guys have posted so far. I think it's really cool. So this week we are going to be talking about Family Guy. And the reason I chose Family Guy over other animated programs like The Simpsons or South Park is because Family Guy is a bit more subtle in its social commentary than South Park. Like South Park basically says, I'm going to have an entire episode where we make fun of Apple, or I'm going to have an entire episode where we make fun of Hillary Clinton. And Family Guy doesn't work that way. They usually have some sort of central plot, but there's a million other things going on. And it could be a little more subtle. It's not as overt as South Park. And that's part of why the show works so well as a commentary on our society. And The Simpsons, as much as I love them, they don't really make as much social commentary as Family Guy. And that's why I didn't want to do The Simpsons. So I picked Family Guy. So you guys are going to watch season 11. I really want you to watch the whole season. There's 23 episodes. But in particular, I want you to pay attention to episodes 2, 3, 7, 8, 14, 16, 19, and 23. And I'll briefly discuss each one of those episodes, or just the questions I want you to think of when you watch those episodes. Try to watch the whole season because I think it's important to understand how Family Guy works as a whole, because the shows that I've pointed out, like the episodes that I've pointed out that I want you to see, are the ones that make a distinct commentary on something, where other episodes are just silly, like Stewie and Brian travel back in time, or Chris goes to space camp, right? There's not a whole lot of actual social commentary going on there. It's just like stupid, laugh out loud comedy. But I think that's the interesting way that Family Guy works, right? Is they sandwich in the social commentary amongst all these other episodes that are just goofy, funny. So that's why it's a little more subtle than something like South Park. So let's talk about Family Guy in general to begin with. The show is most definitely a commentary on the typical American family, right? And even though the characters are outrageous, as our mantra this semester is there is some truth behind all the satire, some truth behind the sarcasm, some truth behind the comedy, right? That's what makes it funny, is that we can relate to it and see that truth or see that reality in ourselves, right? So first of all, the theme song, right? We all know it. Seems today that all you see is violence on movies and sex on TV. But where are those all those old-fashioned values on which we used to rely? Luckily, there's a Family Guy. Well, of course, that theme song is ridiculous because all that's on Family Guy is sex and gratuitous violence, like where people just, there's the reoccurring scene where Peter and the chicken just like beat the shit out of each other. So the theme song is already saying we're going to do the opposite of everything in this theme song. There are no family values in this show. All there is sex and violence and just ridiculous stuff going on. But let's talk first of all about what Family Guy is saying about the typical American family. Okay, so in the typical sitcom, that we're going to talk more about sitcoms um, when we get to The Office in a couple weeks, and like what we expect out of a traditional sitcom with live people. Uh, but to just kind of start with that idea, so we have the father, the mother, three kids, 2 boys and a girl, and then we have the family dog, and then we have a bunch of male friends, but of course we don't have any female friends for Lois, except maybe Bonnie, Joe's wife, but we'll talk more about that in a second. So let's look at each character individually for a second. There's Peter, and Peter is supposed to be representative of a typical, middle-aged man, and that image that we have is not very flattering. I mean, is it, right? Because he's overweight, he's stupid, he's at a dead-end job, he doesn't care about his kids, he drinks all the time, he, philanders with drugs, and it's just very, like it's not a very flattering image of men, which I think we need to think about, because what does that mean if he is the patriarch of the family, that his image is unflattering? Okay, but we're going to come back to that in a second. Then there's Lois, who is smarter, is attractive, as in that she is thin and shapely, but she's also not a very good mother. She's very disinterested, especially in her daughter, and she also goes through a lot of shenanigans, which make her kind of not a very good person, right? Then we have Chris, who is overweight and also stupid, maybe even more stupid than Peter. So he's kind of like Bart Simpson in that respect, that he's a replica of his father. Then we have Meg, who, of course, we all are just supposed to hate Meg, whereas in The Simpsons, Lisa, the character Lisa, is someone we're supposed to think, oh, well, she's going to save the family because she's smart and she has morals. And like Meg is just sort of like, no one likes Meg, and we don't even really like Meg. We don't even necessarily feel sorry for Meg because she's just like an angsty teenage girl that's always miserable. And we don't actually see much of her in the show unless the family is making fun of her in some way. Then, of course, we have Stewie and Brian. And I think this is a really interesting contrast to The Simpsons, because the baby in The Simpsons, Maggie, is a female, right? And she never speaks. Like, she always has her pacifier and it never speaks. And Stewie is a male, and he's like this diabolical mastermind that talks all the time, right? And it's clear that the only person that understands him is Brian, the dog, who also stands up and walks and talks like a normal person. And of course, who is the most intelligent, most sensitive, and most liberal person in Family Guy? The dog. Okay, so what is that saying about a typical American family if the person with the most integrity and the most morals is Brian, who is the dog? And of course, Brian has his shortcomings because he's an alcoholic and he sleeps with all these women, human women, and sometimes canine women. So he's also not a very flattering picture, but he also is the smartest person in the family. So what does that mean, that the smartest person in the family is the dog? Now, I said I wanted to come back to Peter. Now, even though Peter is slovenly, he's fat, he's stupid, the show is mostly about Peter's life and his perspective. And the reason I say that is because it is Peter who has friends, right? So we have Quagmire and Joe, and we used to have Cleveland, but now Cleveland's gone. And so it's Peter who has the friends. It's usually Peter that starts the antics that have to be solved. It's usually Peter that is starting a fight with the kids, or with Lois, or with Brian. And so even though he is probably the worst character on the show, or the most unflattering character when it comes to looking at fathers, an actual society, everything is still centers around him. So everything still centers around the male, the father, the traditional head of the family. But he's the worst character. Like, he's the grossest, the least intelligent, etc. So what do you think that means? What are we supposed to do with that? That the show still centers around the head patriarch, but that patriarch happens to be a moron. Are we supposed to see that as a commentary that having that father figure as a figurehead isn't always a great idea because he could be the most stupid person? Are we seeing that is the show being critical of the patriarchy? Okay, and if you don't know what the patriarchy means, in an academic sense that I'm talking about, it is the idea of having that male figurehead that controls everything else, right? So a lot of people call the United States a patriarchy because it's still controlled by rich white men, right? So if you ever hear like down with the patriarchy, it's down with everything being controlled by these rich white men. So is Peter's character a commentary on that or not? Or does it not go as deep as that? Because Lois certainly isn't a flattering image of an American mother or an American woman either. So let's think more about that. The other thing I want you to think about with Lois is she has jobs here and there. And this season you'll see she gets a job as a phone sex operator, but mostly she is a stay-at-home mom, and they tend to pick on her or make fun of her for being a stay-at-home mom. She's also pretty much a terrible mother 90% of the time. I mean, half the time Stewie is with Brian the dog and just like going off on random adventures. She totally ignores Meg or hates Meg or, disregards Meg or is indifferent to Meg's existence. And she barely interacts with Chris at all. We really see her interacting more with Peter, and usually in some sort of sexual fashion. It's either sexual or anger. So what does that say about the image of Lois as an American woman, an American wife, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a wife in the United States? So these are all the things we want to think about when we're thinking about Family Guy. Because it's funny, right? And we want to laugh at it, but what truth is there behind all the stuff going on, right? Like, what truth is there behind men like Peter, women like Lois, kids like Chris, Meg, and Stewie, and then Brian the dog? We just have to think, like, why is the dog the most intelligent, the most sophisticated character? Is Brian the dog? So we have to think about that and consider what that means. So let's talk a little bit about the episodes I want you to focus on, and I don't want to give too much away because I want you to watch them. So instead I'm going to give you some kind of questions to think about, and you'll see these questions pop up in the discussion posts on Blackboard. So in episode 2, you'll see that the Griffin family has chosen to participate in a Nielsen study, which means they have a box connected to their TV that gives back information to the cable company about how television's consumed. And this episode is particularly important to our class because A, it's very meta. If you, Cody, you were in my poetry and drama class, we know what meta is. But for those of you that don't know, meta is when something refers to something within itself. So I'm sure that makes no sense. But like, basically that means like Family Guy is a TV show and they're referencing watching other TV shows. It's a TV show within a TV show. That's very meta, okay? The things that happen in Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, that's very meta, right? So think of it that way. Meta is a film within a film, a play within a play. When the Kardashians watch their own show on the show, that's like totally meta, right? Okay. So that's important, the meta part, but more importantly, that episode is asking us to consider what sort of media do we consume? Like, why do we consume things like Keeping Up with the Kardashians? Like, why are we so fascinated with things like that? What about these reality shows, like that are contests like American Idol and all that, America's Got Talent, and So You Think You Can Dance, and what does it say about ourselves when we consume content like that? What of ourselves do we see reflected in that kind of TV programming? Like, why are we watching things like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, or The Hills, which probably isn't on anymore, or, The Real Housewives of wherever, right? Why are we fascinated by that kind of stuff? So pay attention to how we consume media. What is Family Guy saying in episode 2 about how we consume media? In episode 3, Brian and Stewie find out that Carter, who is Lois's rich father, right? Her father and mother are very rich, has a cure for cancer, and he's hiding it because he's making a profit by it not being available. What does that say about America's obsession with money, or our capitalist society? And there's some other episodes that are gonna talk about money. So what is it saying about, would we rather make money in the United States, or would we rather help people? And what is that episode 3, saying about that? In episode 7, it's Lois's birthday, and Peter basically tells her that she's an old dried up hag, so she kind of goes crazy and acts much younger than her age, and then he doesn't like that either. So with that episode, that's episode 7, I really want you to think about women, the double standard that exists between women and men, right? So like, if men have sex with a bunch of girls, he's a player. If women have a bunch of sex with guys, she's a slut, right? And with Lois, if she's not sexy and fun and, wants to have sex all the time and be crazy, then she's an old hag. But if she's an old hag and is, not running around being ridiculous and being overtly sexual, that's not good either. They want, a woman's supposed to be sexual, but also not supposed to be sexual at the same time. So that episode really asks us to consider that weird binary. Like, women have to be sexual, women cannot be sexual. It's this weird sort of opposition that doesn't make any sense, right? You can't have, you can't have both things. Like, women can either be sexual or they can't be. So I really want you to think about the commentary that Family Guy is making on women and women's sexuality in that episode. That's episode 7. Episode 8, Meg finds herself having a crush on a guy, and then she finds out that he's gay. So this episode, of course, I want you to think about, how is Family Guy addressing how we stereotype gay guys, gay men in our community? How do we treat homosexuality in our culture? I want you to think about how Family Guy is addressing all of those issues. There's also some stuff about date rape in that episode, and I want you to consider, how is that episode making a commentary on consensual or non-consensual sex? I mean, date rape is kind of a big deal, and they're making fun of it on the show, which you'll see. Like, Meg goes to get some roofies from Quagmire to set up this bizarre homosexual encounter between this guy she likes and her brother, Chris. So what I'm asking about that episode is, what is Family Guy trying to say about how we as Americans view sex? And I mean, like, actual sex, not gender, like intercourse. Like, what is our relationship with sex? And that's what I want you to think about in that episode, as well as the stereotypes about homosexuality. In episode 14, Chris steals money because he needs to wear, the latest shoes. He doesn't have the most popular shoes in his class, and the kids make fun of him. And that episode is really all about the characters desiring something and their need to possess something so badly that they go above and beyond the normal limits because they desperately need these things. They need to quench their desire. So I want you to think about, what does that say about Americans as consumers? Our need to always have the coolest thing, or our need to always have what we want. I think that sometimes we're a very entitled nation, and we think we should get the things that we want simply because we want them, right? So think about that idea of desire and achieving the ability to quench that desire to get what we want. That's what I want you to think about that's episode 14. Episode 16 is all about Peter makes a Muslim friend. So you can imagine it's all about the stereotypes of Islam and Muslims. And the episode does something very interesting, because at first it seems like the episode is going to make fun of the way that Americans judge Muslims, or judge Middle Eastern people, or judge the religion of Islam, and point out how ludicrous and hypocritical and judgmental that is. But then, of course, the Islamic character ends up being a terrorist. So why would Family Guy make that move? Why would they make, the Muslim guy a terrorist? Why give in to that stereotype? Why do you think they want to, give in to that idea that all Middle Eastern people are terrorists? Like, why do that? Why not go the other way? Is it because him being a terrorist is funnier? Or is it because it's pointing out our desire for that assumption to begin with, or our need to have that assumption be met with reality? So that's a really important episode. So I really want you to think closely about that one. Okay, episode 16. In episode 19, Lois, for once, starts hanging out with Peter's friends. And I want you to think about, can women and men be platonic friends? Okay, can heterosexual men and women be friends? Does a woman have a place in a group of all guy friends? And that's what that episode questions. And I think you'll see the answer, and then I want you to question that answer as well. Finally, in episode 23 is all about rich versus poor. Okay, and when we were in some of your posts about the SNL Kissing Family skit, a lot of you were saying, like, oh, everyone's so quick to judge by appearances or by outward expression, etc., etc. And I thought that was interesting, and I was thinking, like, do we really just judge by outward appearance? Like, okay, that person is pretty or not pretty, or attractive or unattractive, handsome or not handsome, or do we look further into each person's physical appearance? And I think we do, because I think we are raised as capitalists, and we're raised as consumers in the United States. So when you look at someone, you usually automatically know if that person is rich or poor, right? Or just average, right? You know that the girl with the Burberry purse comes from money, right? Or at least you make that assumption, you make that judgment, okay? Whereas the girl with a purse that's obviously from Walmart or from somewhere else, or is not a brand name, you might think average, right? Whatever. Everyone knows when shoes come, like tennis shoes, come from Walmart instead of being, an Adidas or a Reebok or whatever. So you're going to assume that that person is poor. And, what does that mean? That we judge people not only by outward appearance, but by how much money they have. Okay. And if you think about it, you automatically do that every time you look at somebody, because we've been trained to do that. Just like we've been trained to automatically see, does someone have a smartphone or not have a smartphone? Do they not have a smartphone because they can't afford it, or because, they're being very hipster and, they don't want a smartphone? So we do that all the time. So I want you to think in that final episode, episode 23, about what it's saying about the difference between rich people and poor people, and that desire that everyone has to be really wealthy. Okay, so mainly the things I want you to think about in all the episodes, not just the episodes I've mentioned, is gender, right? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? How do women and men interact in the show? What does the show say about family? It's called Family Guy. What is it saying about American families? Okay, that family is dysfunctional. Are all American families dysfunctional? Is that a reflection of what family is really like in the United States? Think about that. Think about consumerism, the things we want, the things we buy, the things we watch on TV, the things we see in the media. All of that is being commented on in the show as well. Okay, so those are the things I want you to think about with Family Guy. Your discussion questions are up on Blackboard. Also, next week we're going to be doing the David Sedaris book, Let's Explore Diabetes with Owls, which is so fun. So make sure you're reading that. It does not take long to read. I know it looks long. It's like 250 pages, but you can just zip through it because it's really easy to read. It's really funny. So make sure that you guys are reading that. And I'll actually be posting the videos and the questions for that probably on Wednesday of this week, so a little earlier for you. Also, if you're watching this video tomorrow, which is Monday, I will be posting your first paper assignment sometime tomorrow night, Monday night, okay? And feel free to email me or Google chat me or whatever if you need more clarification on what that paper is going to entail. Because your two papers, one's worth 30% and one's worth 40%. So the papers are 70% of your grade. So you really want to do well on them. So, don't be afraid to ask me questions. Don't be afraid to send me drafts. Don't be afraid to really be like, I don't know what I'm doing. I need help because, I'm here for you. So great work with the Colbert Report and the Daily Show and Saturday Night Live. I wish we could have done more with that, but there's just not time. So I hope you enjoy watching Family Guy, and I hope it makes you think about our American popular culture. Okay, thanks. Bye.